Dance and theater just have so much to bring to education. The agenda of dance education and education is the same, and that dance must be at the table whenever education is discussed. I started teaching, but I wanted to dance, so I went to Teachers College and got a master's in dance education. I danced my brains out with top teachers. And then I got a job teaching dance when there was no such thing as a job teaching dance. And I figured out what a dance program in an elementary school was, and I figured out how to make a dance program in another elementary school, all elementary schools. And then I got that big idea, dance for every child in every school.
This is Arts Educators Save the World, where successful artists and their mentors talk about how arts education transformed their lives. Hey, Alec.
Yes.
What's happening?
I'm here.
I'm so glad. And I'm so glad that you're here with me for this episode of Arts Educators Save the World, where for the first time, we pivot away from arts educators and pivot toward arts administrators, advocates, folks who are thinking about the role for the arts in education at the grand scale, folks who have the ear of, for example, the chancellor of the New York City public school system, folks who serve all of New York City's kids by providing them with free tickets to Broadway shows if they are first-time theater goers. Russell and Jody, who we're going to talk to today, are real movers and shakers in the arts education world. In fact, there was a recent article in the New York Times featuring one of our guests, Jody Arnhold, that is titled, "Repeat After Her, There Is No Dance Without Dance Education." Not only does that encapsulate why Russell wanted to bring Jody on as his mentor for this podcast, but also a big part of our approach to thinking about how we transform education, which is to look seriously at art forms and how the teaching and learning of those art forms can change the way we do education writ large. I know Alec and I learned a ton, and we are excited for you all to hear about how Russell and Jody transform arts education as a whole field of advocacy, policy, and work at a national level.
And while they are both clearly rabble-rousers, I have a strange reaction to it, which is I'm very calmed that they exist in the world. When you listen to two people like that, who have done what they've done for so long, who are such experts at what they're doing and in talking about what they're doing, I just find myself being, I'm so glad you exist. I'm so glad there are people like you that go do the things, and while I just sit here and make a podcast about it. So I love this one.
Yeah, it's an honor to be another platform for them to share the incredible work that they're doing with citywide in New York City, with New York City Public Schools, and nationwide with their work and their advocacy. So I'm going to kick us off by introducing our artist today, Russell Granet. Russell, I did a little Googling and history looking to get a sense of how to situate you to our listeners. So feel free to jump in, but I will say what I've learned about you, which is all makes me feel like you're an arts education brother in arms. Russell trained at Emerson College and the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. And from what I read about him, when he returned to the States with an interest in becoming a professional actor and artist, he said to himself, what do people do who want to pursue those kinds of careers? And found out that one becomes a teaching artist, and spent more than 20 years as a teaching artist in and around New York. And I hope to learn all the other places and spaces where you did that work. And along the way, got a master's from Steinhardt, which is the School of Education at NYU, has gotten to teach at Steinhardt, has been the executive director of a range of different arts organizations, including Lincoln Center Education, was acting president of the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, and now is the executive director of New 42, which we will hear a lot about over the next 45 minutes. And it is just an honor and a thrill to get an opportunity to hear from you, Russell, and for you to get a chance to introduce to us your mentor, who you've brought on the show today to share some ideas and insights. So I'm going to pass the mic to you, Russell.
Great. Thank you, Erica. And well done on the research. Just a note, because there are lots of teaching artists out there in the world, that I was a full-time teaching artist for about 5 years and then supported teaching artists beyond that. I don't have the breadth and depth of a 20-year teaching artist in the field. Although I will say, I'm always happy to report that if you know the New York City subway system, I have been to every last stop of every train in New York City. So even teaching artists who've been in the field for 20 years may not be able to say that.
I mean, that goes on the CV, I think. You need to have a line of special skills or accomplishments that says stopped at every single stop on the MTA. That's pretty impressive.
I've hit the last station on some of those, but that's because I fell asleep and missed my stop and wound up somewhere in Queens I hadn't planned on, but that's impressive.
Yeah, this was normally at like 6:30 in the morning trying to get to schools at the start of the day. I am so thrilled to be able to introduce Jody Gottfried Arnhold, who, Erica, you need to know is a Badger. She was honored by the school as, is it the Big Apple Badger? I forget the actual award or the honor from Wisconsin.
Excuse me, Russell. Excuse me. It's the Badger of the Year.
Oh, the Badger of the Year.
The Badger of the Year.
Yeah, I got to get that right.
That just happened. Yeah. You were this year's Badger of the Year, weren't you?
Yep.
I heard about that from my colleagues.
My husband says it's very deserved, and I am definitely the Badgerer of the Year.
Well, I could stop there because of the enormity of that honor, but I'd like to say a couple more things about Jody. Jody was the founder of Dance Education Laboratory, Dell, at 92Y. And if you don't know her or her name, she is a luminary in dance education and dance for all. Jody was the executive producer of the NY Emmy-nominated documentary PS Dance, Dance Education in the Public Schools. And I think Jody may agree with me, but the foundation of her brilliance and dedication and commitment to this field was 25 years on the ground in the classroom teaching dance in the New York City public schools. And in addition, because Jody is so dedicated to educators, she created the Arnhold Graduate Dance Education Program at Hunter College. And if that wasn't enough, she's the benefactor behind the doctorate in dance education at Teachers College at Columbia University. She's the board chair of the 92Y. She holds a BA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And an MA in dance education from Teachers College at Columbia University. And I was in the audience last Thursday night where she received an honorary doctorate from Hunter College. Wow. So I'm thrilled that more people get to know more about Jody Arnhold.
I would love to start by having both of you tell me and maybe tell each other about the first time you remember working together. And it's okay if you don't have the same memory. It's actually probably delightful and better. Jody, why don't you get us started? First time you remember working with Russell.
I think I met Russell when he was at that juncture, that point of switching from being a teaching artist and a mentor of teaching artists into arts administration. It was at the Center for Arts Education, which was founded in 1995, and I was one of the first board members. Russell joined pretty shortly after the beginning. I think it was probably 1998. He was a program officer overseeing grants in Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn. So I guess more rides on the subway. There was an executive director, the founding executive director, Hollis Hedrick. He didn't want foundation people. He wanted practitioners. And Russell was a teaching artist. He had just really come from schools. He was pretty young. I think I was probably pretty young myself. But I remember thinking, this is going to be interesting to watch. This kid is going places. And I couldn't have imagined what fun I would have watching him all these years.
I remember that. It was September of 1998, and I had just started at the Center for Arts Education. What was interesting to me about that memory is that Jody was sort of a quiet force in 98, which is not really the case anymore. The quiet force, less quiet. But she was definitely someone who you listened to when she spoke. And she led our program committee, that was the team where I worked. So I had very strong memories of meeting Jody and hearing about her children and her dedication to dance. But what was interesting to me as I think back on that is that there was a quiet, sort of more intense leadership from Jody, as opposed to, I think, where we are now, which might just happen over time, which is like no holds barred. This is what it is. Like, every kid needs dance, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that happens. Like, I just think that has changed for me over the last 30 years.
It's important, Erica, to notice that Russell and I always had some kind of a personal connection. And it really feels like I've always known him. It feels like I've known him much longer than I've actually known him.
Can you say, either of you, what brought about that change? In other words, was there a precipitating event, or has the need to articulate the value of arts education become more intense? What's precipitated that change?
I just think as we both mature and get older in the field, there's a sense of urgency that I feel greater every year I'm in this field. And so I think I was more patient 30 years ago than I am now. I think I felt like I had more to lose if I took risks 30 years ago. And I don't feel as much that way. And I really do credit, and Jody may not even be aware of that sort of presence in my life, but if you don't make a statement and you don't stand up for something you believe in, it's never going to be heard. It's not like someone can read your mind. I don't know whether or not you sort of gain gravitas over the years, or your titles change, or people see you in a different way. But there is, the sense of urgency has increased over the last 30 years. And maybe that's just because I know that I'm not going to be around forever. And so how do we keep this going? There can be a frustration, and Jody and I have both felt this way, that we're in the same conversation. We've been in conversations and we've laughed after the conversation and go, weren't we in that same exact conversation 15 years ago? There's a impatience that I think grows. You know, every time there's a chancellor in the New York City Public Schools, every time there's a new director of arts education, every time there's a new head of the NEA, you have to start the churn again. As you do it and you get older, you spend less time on the chit chat, and then you get right to the point.
Can I ask a question about I guess I call it the state of play, the state of the union right now? And I guess we can be specific about whether you want to think about arts education in general or dance in particular in the New York school system. For those who are not familiar with this at all, where are we? Scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you can now retire and your work is done. And then also, was there a heyday? Was there a time where things were flowering and it now is not so dire? Can you give us a sense of what it's like for those who don't know it?
There's a difference from being the new kid at the table to being the leader, the seasoned leader with the hair color to show it. We do have a new mayor in New York. We have a new chancellor. We have a new head of the arts office. We are hearing the right words. It's really heartening. We have a chancellor who's saying, I want to be the chancellor for the arts. We have a director of the arts office who's an artist himself and is really a great representative of the work, but they're both new at this, and they know it. And there is a learning curve, and they are in it now. We're anxious, we want it now. Every minute lost is a kid that misses opportunity. So it's an interesting time right now. Ready, willing, and able. We've got to get there. And we've got to get the message clear. What is arts education? It's the certified teacher. We weren't always there. People didn't always know that, didn't always understand it. It's the certified teacher plus the cultural organization. That's arts education. That's the model.
And appropriate space and resources.
Materials, resources, funds, standards, blueprint, quality, sequential, culturally relevant, for every child. We have pockets of excellence, but have we reached everybody? No, we've reached not everybody. There are a lot of children, a lot of schools that are nowhere. We have the best, and we have places that are nowhere. That's in New York.
And I think that's true throughout the country as well.
Yeah.
I would add to answering the question around this idea, was there a golden era? I think of my 30 plus years in the field. We've had chancellors that wanted to be the arts chancellor. It's cyclical, right? And I don't think there's ever been a really dire time that wasn't recognizable. And I don't think there's ever been a time where it's seemed amazing. And that also has been recognizable. It really is cyclical. What has changed, there was a time when you couldn't get certified to be an elementary school teacher unless you played the piano. Inherent in that was this idea that a piano would be played, or that there would be an expectation that there would be music in the classroom on an elementary school basis. That's not the case anymore. And I think we should be looking at higher education and how we're certifying not arts teachers. We need arts teachers. Jody has certified over 150 dance educators in New York City. In the general ed and special ed settings, the idea of the arts being integral to how they teach needs to happen on the graduate school level, not once they hit the classroom. Because I think once they hit the classroom, they're already overwhelmed. So I think there's work to be done around how we're educating and preparing teachers for the classroom.
And how does that connect to your work, Russell? Do you have an opportunity to work with teacher preparation programs? Talk a little more about how that works and how you connect directly with those pre-service teacher programs.
So at New 42, we are the largest provider of the performing arts to the New York City public schools. So we do direct service with young people, and we subsidize all of our work to the New York City public schools. So as an example, what would be an $80, $90, or $100 theater ticket is a $2 ticket to any student who's within the New York City public school system. As far as teacher education goes, and our research supports this, Jody and I are advocating for the arts for every kid through a K-12 education, younger, older. But there is something very specific about the 5 to 10-year-old. And that is really the sweet spot if you're looking to create a habit. What we know from theater goers now, and this is where Jody and I, our conversations differ sometimes, because I think Jody thinks dance is the art form and I might think theater is the art form, but we will agree to disagree on that. And I think ultimately we want all kids to have all art forms. But if you look at what creates a theater going habit, it starts when they're very young. If we can get young people between the ages of 5 and 10 in our theater a minimum of 3 times, our research shows that begins to create a habit over time with them and with their families. And so I say that because our focus on teacher education is early childhood. Because we want the teachers getting the arts into the curriculum at a very young age, with the hopes in that creates a pipeline into arts as they get older.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Russell. It's interesting to note that you don't have to be certified to teach the arts in the elementary school. And that's, a battle that's something I've said one too many times. But you know what you have to do? You have to keep saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over until somebody says, oh, I have an idea. Let's certify elementary school teachers in the arts. Let's not hire any more elementary school arts teachers unless they're certified. That's really key.
Is it fair to say that both of you have really focused on the performing arts as a set of art forms?
Well, my expertise, and Russell's too, is the performing arts. Russell theater, I'm dance. But when I say dance, I can substitute out the arts. I mean the arts. I go for dance because no one else is really, and because it's my love, my passion, and my area of expertise. But I really mean all the arts. Russell and I have, he's given me a tagline. He says, dance ahead. And that's exactly it. Yes, dance ahead. And I always remind him, Russell, we're doing this alphabetically. That's dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts. Okay, can we agree?
Yeah, but somehow you win when it's alphabetical. I will say that when Jody and I were working together at the Center for Arts Education, that was across all disciplines.
Yeah.
So that was not just the performing arts. That had a very strong visual art component. When we're advocating as professionals, we are advocating for all the arts all the time for all kids. I think personally, just to reiterate and just say that I think we have our own personal art forms that we bring to it, and certainly the performing arts.
And I would also say, as a person who also is a theater artist by training and prepares both classroom educators and also artists to become teaching artists, though I also advocate for and engage with all art forms, there is a lot of research evidence to indicate that the performing arts are gone almost completely from certified educators in the elementary school, whereas across the nation, about I'm going to get these statistics wrong, but it is something in the 60-ish% range of public schools that have certified visual arts teachers and music teachers in their schools. And so I'm sort of standing your perspective a little bit and saying, I think there is reason and import to really put the performing arts in the spotlight. I didn't even plan that until now. Put the performing arts in the spotlight in terms of our advocacy and our practice, because the visual arts and music have been successful in maintaining their minor but still solidified place in the elementary school curriculum.
Definitely.
I think I know the report you're talking about. I think it was something like in the high 60s were music and visual art. And literally, I think it was like 4 and 5% of public schools had dance and theater.
Yeah.
So just to support what you're saying, Eric.
Dance and theater are neck and neck with that very low percentage. But music and art have a longer tradition of being in the schools. It's more common. They're kind of first. Music and art are always first. And actually, in some standards, in some writing, in some advocacy, they say the arts, and they don't mean those arts that I named in alphabetical order. They mean music and art. They do. They don't mean dance and theater. And you know what, Russell and I are big advocates for our art forms, and dance and theater just have so much to bring to education. You know, I always say, and you can substitute whatever you want, that the agenda of dance education and education is the same, and that dance must be at the table whenever education is discussed. I really believe that. Also, music and art have fantastic advocacy arms. They're very organized. We haven't quite gotten there in dance and theater. We're trying, but we're not there.
So, Alec, we've talked with Jody and with Russell some about the importance that they place on having certified arts teachers in the classroom. I just want to reflect on that a little bit with you, because my own take on that is slightly different, which is, so I run a program here at UW-Madison that I've developed, which is an undergraduate minor for students who don't necessarily want to become classroom teachers, but who are artists and activists who want to have teaching in their lives. It's called the Arts and Teaching. It's not a certification, but a certificate. Something that I've found over the years in my work with students is the desire to be a certified teacher as a profession is a particular professional focus. Not all people who make excellent teachers of the arts want to have certified classroom teaching as their focus. I've had a lot of success thinking at the intersection of those and pairing teaching artists and those who are artists first and activists first, folks like Langston and Rich, who we talked to in a previous episode, pairing them with certified classroom teachers to build programs for young people that stretch across the different aspects of their teaching and learning lives. And so it has been interesting to me to hear Jody continue to push on certification as the primary mechanism for making change. And I guess I wondered, as a parent and as a person who experiences the arts in education as a consumer, does that strike you in any particular way as one of those approaches seeming more productive or fitting into the structure in any particular way?
Well, I'll take it to my life, which is that I'm a certified American Sign Language interpreter. I am not certified to teach in any way, but I teach a lot. I have taught hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of workshops to other certified American Sign Language interpreters. We all need to take a certain amount of workshops. These certification maintaining workshops works because there are so many of us and we have a variety of expertises inside and outside of interpreting. And if we were to wait around for certified credentialed teachers to be teaching these, it's just untenable. It just wouldn't work. My question back to you, though, is there is something of a quality control process for us, which is that we are reviewed. We are reviewed by our students, and those reviews are known, and how many stars they get and what sort of feedback they get, because not everyone is good at teaching. So the question back to you is, for these teaching artists who I agree, if you're going to limit artists that go into the classroom to those who are certified, that's quite a limit. But what do you do to maintain quality control?
It's a great point. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that Jody really hones in on this teacher certification piece. The way it works now is many of these artists are placed in classrooms either through their work with organizations or as a service provider that a public school or a school district matches them through. Those are their own form of quality control, in large part because that's how everything is paid for, right? So one of the reasons your rating system works, I would guess, is because people pay for classes. You're not going to be able to keep teaching if you don't have good ratings and therefore people don't sign up for your classes. Well, in public education, it doesn't have the same consumer system, which is also true for teachers, by the way, right? It's not a consumer-based system. Because funding for arts education in schools and in informal spaces is primarily grant and private funder based, the organizations that continue to receive those funds are the organizations that continue to be able to employ teaching artists. And so it's still market driven, but it's not individually market driven. It's philanthropically market driven. And I want to make one more point, if I can, while we're talking about this. I think the other reason that Jody pushes on this, although we didn't get a chance to talk about this, is at a policy level, having a marker of what counts is part of how you maintain the importance of something. So let me give you an example. In the state of Wisconsin, where I'm from.
Hold on. You're from New York, lady.
Okay, you're right. Where I live, where I've made my home for the last 20 plus years, to graduate from a Wisconsin public high school, you have to receive 3 half-credit PE credits. And that is built into the Wisconsin state constitution. In Minnesota, you need, I think it's 1 full credit, so 2 half-credit arts courses in order to graduate from high school. Both of those moves were the result of union-based advocacy to ensure that those professionals would continue to have employment. So in the 60s, the PE Teachers Union, in combination with the Green Bay Packers, constructed a successful political campaign to ensure that PE teachers would have jobs in Wisconsin high schools from here on out. Because if every high schooler needs 3 PE classes to graduate from high school, you got to have PE teachers at every school. The same has not been true of the arts in Wisconsin. There are no arts requirements for graduation. And so whether or not arts teachers continue to have jobs is driven entirely by how many kids enroll in those classes. If you have a downturn in instrumentalists, your high school band teacher could lose a job. And so I think, to come back to Jody's point, making some of those features core elements of policymaking is part of how you instantiate values into the public discourse.
My name is Graham Isidore. I have a progressive eye disease called keratoconus. Admitting I'm losing my vision has been hard, but explaining it to other people has been harder. Lately, I've been trying to talk about it. Short-sighted is an attempt to explain what vision loss feels like by exploring how it sounds. By sharing my story, we get into all the things you don't see about hidden disabilities. Short-sighted from CBC's Personally, available now.
Can Can I ask a question? I'm slightly on the outside of this. I'm not an educator, but I was a theater major and an artist now, a filmmaker. My wife is an early childhood educator, however, and she now trains early childhood educators in project-based learning. And I know that in general, there is a fear, there is a consternation with anything that is non-STEM, where the conversation turns to standards and the fear of losing out and not achieving, et cetera, et cetera. But Jody, you used the word standards early on today. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the arts and dance and theater relate to standards in school and why teachers, why educators, why administrators shouldn't be afraid of these things being extraneous and outside the bounds of what is quote unquote needed in schools.
I'm kind of a convert myself, and I've come to really appreciate standards. It comes from my experience creating the blueprint for dance in New York City. We've kind of made our own standards, and they're very accepted in New York, in the education community and in the cultural community. We've done a really good job of putting them out there. You know, we say everybody can find themselves in the blueprint because the blueprints standards come from best practice. If they don't come from best practice, they're of no use. So I love the standards. I love blueprint. And they work two ways. If you don't know what to do, look at the blueprint. If you know what to do and want to find out where it fits in the big picture, look at the blueprint. It works both ways.
The standards, just to clarify, are not about moving towards a place of testing kids in the arts. And when you talk about STEM, Alec, the subjects that are tested have the greatest amount of resources attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They get the most presence from principals and superintendents, and they get the most funding because there is high stakes testing attached to those subjects. For the arts, the standards allow the artist and the certified teacher and the classroom teacher to understand what good looks like and for ideas. Like, I think it's a great way, if you, as Jody was saying, if you don't know what to do, you go to the standards and there are all kinds of suggestions. But it's not on the road to trying to figure out how to standardize the arts. And I think some people get nervous about the standards because they feel like that's where it's headed. That's not where it's headed. I think we all feel very strongly that none of us are advocating for standardized tests in the arts, but we do want to give teachers and educators and parents a resource. And the blueprint is an amazing resource in all art forms.
Yeah, the blueprint is not a curriculum. It's a framework.
Right.
And you can find your way in there are multiple entry points, multiple ways to connect yourself to the framework.
I was just going to say, I think that, the distinction that you made, Russell, between standards and standardization is really important. That's echoed in what Jody said as well, right? Standards are opportunities for educators to understand what's desired, to understand what represents hoped for outcomes and practices, but don't necessarily indicate a lockstep set of goals or problems or ways of knowing and doing. That is what sometimes happens, right? Because when we create standards, then we sometimes say, well, if we're going to get everybody to this thing, let's make a set of points all along the way to ensure that everyone is doing that, to ensure, quote unquote, no one is left behind. And that standardization process, I think, is what's so harmful. So I really appreciate both of you kind of making that distinction.
They kind of steered a teacher to a certain kind of instruction, a certain set of values. I ended up liking these assessments in the arts.
Can you give an example, Jody, of a particular assessment that you thought, aha, yes, this is a way that represents how we ought to be measuring what kids know and can do?
They did things like work with a partner to develop a sequence that uses mirroring.
Mm-hmm.
A teacher sees a task like that and realizes, oh, my kids have to work with a partner. My kids need some choreographic devices like mirroring, and what else? My kids need to make dances.
I think a lot about how art making of all forms, although as a performing artist, I think about dance and theater, how art making encourages kids to create representations of knowledge through the medium of the particular art form, whether that's movement, whether that's the written word, whether it's the stage directions and acting out of a scene, and how the capacity to generate representations and understand how those representations allow you to communicate an idea is the core of what good learning is, regardless of discipline. So what I love about the example you gave, Jody, right, is that that's a representational exercise. The idea that a kid, along with their partner, could create a set of movements that can be done in reflection, and to be able to understand what reflection is and does. And then I could even imagine, I'm scheming, like what could this imagined curriculum look like, right? Scheming something that said, okay, now write down those movements in a way that two others might perform this mirroring exercise, to get kids thinking about other kinds of representational formats for dance making that could be communicated with others.
Exactly. You can make the dance test.
That's what that made me.
All of this goes very much to Erica's book, How the Arts Can Save Education. As she was saying there, so much of what she wrote about and is interested in and sparked this is, okay, here's what you do on the arts side of school, and then here's what you do on the non-arts side of school, and never the twain shall meet. In fact, it's what are the arts practices that can inform the rest of education. And that, I think, is obviously not just good to know as humans and good to know for students, but also is something that I'm guessing administrators like to hear, and teachers more broadly like to hear that, no, we're not teaching dance necessarily so they can go be a dancer, though that's an avenue you want to hold open to them. It's so that fill in the blank. And I'm wondering if you could fill in that blank a little bit for us of how do you see the arts and arts education informing the rest of education and the rest of life?
McKinsey just came out with a list of 56 qualities that are necessary for success in life, success in work. And you can go down those 56, and arts education, dance education, arts education attends to each and every one of them.
I would want to preface before I answer the question by saying, I don't want to leave the argument that the arts are important because the arts are important.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I look forward to the day when I don't have to fill in that blank, when I can say the study of theater, dance, music, visual art is important because it's important. And to talk about all the very specific things that those art forms do just purely because they're an art form. But because that's not the world we live in, I'm happy to answer the question. And I think that the big takeaway for me, and I don't mean to set principals up, but I do ask principals often, tell me about who you want graduating your school. Tell me about their characteristics. And they will say things like, I want them to stand up tall. I want them to have a point of view. I want them to have a strong handshake. I want them to make eye contact. I want them to understand there's more than one answer to a solution or a problem. I want them to be able to work well with others. I'm sure they align with what McKinsey just published. And then I very innocently will say, okay, great. Now point to the curriculum where those things happen. And they stumble. And oftentimes, if there is a strong arts program, that's where they tend to point. And I think it's just making sure that the conversation that Jody and I have spent a very long time, as have the two of you, in translating what it is that we do into other language to somehow make it more palatable for those who don't understand the importance of it. But personally, and this is as a parent and as an advocate for this work, is I think there's something really powerful in the world of high stakes testing where we allow kids to successfully fail and recover from that failure and create something even more brilliant. I don't know any other subject that does that. I suppose scientists could probably argue that happens in the lab, but there is something really beautiful about watching a painter with an empty canvas or a dancer with a floor and actors with no. The skills that they are obtaining by really going for something and falling flat on their face And the artist mentality is you get right back up and you try it again in a different way. And I think that skill, more than any other skill, would serve you for the rest of your life. So that tends to be my kind of soapbox. If we can give kids the skills to successfully fail, then we've done our job.
Yeah, well said, Russell. Although I just have to take this a little bit further, which is...
Of course you do.
Of course I do. Because you actually now are my mentor. Maybe I was your mentor at one point, but now I don't know. I think you're more my mentor. I think we switched. Yes, the arts stand on their own. I agree with that 100%. However, nothing in this life stands on its own. Nothing. The arts are related to everything. What are you going to make the art about? What are you going to make the dance about? Something. And in school, it's going to be something in school, or it's going to be something related to that child's life. It's going to be something in the curriculum. It's going to be an emotion. It's going to be a holiday. It's going to be a season. It's going to be the weather. It's going to be somebody got married. It's going to be that somebody died, whatever. It's going to be the nursery rhyme. It's going to be the math concept. And you have to be prepared to make a dance about all of it, anything and all of it.
Or theater.
Or theater. Or art.
Theater, yeah.
Or music.
Right, but you never hear a math teacher say math is important because it does something in science, or math is important because it helps the English. I mean, I just want to say that again, that I do think art teachers, all art forms, oftentimes have to make a case that their subject is something else. I've never heard a math teacher says math is important because it's going to be good for their English class. Right. It's just, they don't have to make that argument. Right.
I agree with you at the high level sort of rhetorical space, but I would say that good math instruction, and this is where those folks can learn from us, ought to do that, right? It ought to say, here is how mathematizing the world helps you do other things. I would say this is a gift that we can give to other educators, is to say exactly how we think about the tools of art making. That's how you all should think about the tools of your medium, like mathematics. There's some amazing research happening right now at the intersection of dance and science and dance and mathematics that looks at the relationship between those conceptual ideas and ideas about how choreography can teach us about some of these scientized ideas, and then the way that mathematics can teach us about some choreographic principles. And so putting my nerd academic hat on, the mutuality of that is actually quite exciting to me, and a place where I hope we can all go as educators. On this podcast, we primarily talk to practitioners and their mentors. And so we hear a lot about how they work together around that. But I'd love to hear a little bit about the practice of arts leadership. Russell, how you learned to become the arts leader that you are, and how Jody has mentored you in that, and sort of, Jody, your histories and practices. So I'm just going to pass the mic to the two of you. I'd love to just have y'all chat about that for a little.
I'm happy to jump in, Jody.
Go right ahead.
I credit a lot of whatever leadership qualities I possess to my time at conservatory. Because I'm not an MBA. I did not go to HBS. I don't have an advanced degree in business administration or arts management, for that matter. But I did go to conservatory. And at that level of conservatory, it's high risk. Even to get in, you have to have a certain amount of sort of chutzpah to even figure out a way to get in and then stay in. And there was something about the quality of good acting being really about listening and reading the room and paying attention. And I've watched fellow leaders or future leaders or colleagues of mine not really pay attention. And I don't mean to make light of this. There's something about walking into a room, and I worked for a very strong leader, and people might argue one of the best leaders in the nonprofit world, Reynold Levy, who was the president of Lincoln Center. And I'd watch my colleagues go in and ask him for something. And I was like, ooh, like, you didn't read that. Like, it's not what you ask for. In my mind, it's when you ask for it. And you only know that if you're paying attention. What I learned at conservatory was excellence And excellence is really in the eye of the beholder. So I don't want to engage in a conversation of what good is, but I think I know what good is in my own world. And this idea of really being a listener and taking in a room has served me as someone who runs things, I think, really well. And that relationships matter. I think Jody and I have been close for 35 years because we've kept we haven't always worked together. That's how we met, working together. But Jody is clearly a leader in the field, if not the leader in dance education and dance generally. And in watching her lead, listen, and then at a certain point, kind of sum it up and say, we got to move on this. And I think all of those helped me because I was paying attention. And I don't think people pay attention enough in that world. And so Jody possesses those qualities that I found enormously helpful when I was asked to lead institutions. I think every head of an institution should have gone to conservatory.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we'd be in better shape.
Yeah, we should pull all our leaders from art school. Absolutely. For both of us, I think that the arts had a great impact on us from a very early age. I mean, I had a very, very rich arts education growing up, especially starting at age 8 and all the way through until I left for college. And I left for college to dance. I left for college to go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which had the very first dance program. That's why I picked it. But in my whole childhood, I was studying dance, studying technique, making dances, performing in high schools all over the city, performing on stages that were, the seesaw circuit put up in the summer for professionals to perform for children. And I was always the child because they always needed a child. They needed the elephant's child. They needed the boy in the donkey fable. They needed the sorcerer's apprentice. So I had that. I had that experience. I pursued dance. I studied dance at Wisconsin. I came to New York. Why? To study dance. I had two things in my head: dance and New York City. I wasn't particularly focused, but that was enough. And that led through a long, long process to, where I am today. And dance was always the through line. I started teaching, but I wanted to dance. So I went to teachers college and got a master's in dance education. I danced my brains out with top teachers. And then, I got a job teaching dance when there was no such thing as a job teaching dance. And I figured out what a dance program in an elementary school was. And I figured out how to make a dance program in another elementary school, this elementary school, that all elementary schools. And then I got that big idea, dance for every child in every school. I never studied anything that would feed into that. But when I went back to school on a sabbatical, I didn't study dance. I studied curriculum and teaching. And it made such sense after teaching for a long time. All comes together, one thing after another. When I look back at what I've done, when I look back over it, it kind of has an arc. People say, how did you know what to do? I never knew what to do. I always knew what to do next. That's what I knew. Mm-hmm. And Russell,
Yeah, I get that.
I'm going to look to you as my mentor. What should I do next, Russell?
I want to wrap up by asking, and Jody, you asked the question, and now I might pose it back to you, but also pose it to Russell. What's next for you all? Where are you headed with New 42? Where are you headed with your own arts leadership? Jody, where are you headed in the near future with arts education and advocacy?
Well, I've got my hands full, so there's no rest, but I am always looking for the next big idea. I really am. I'm just looking and listening. I know it when I see it. That's my great talent. I know it when I see it.
Talent spotting. I like it.
We are very conscious of the fact that arts and relationship to arts has to do with access. If you don't know that they exist, or you don't know that there are options, you don't know necessarily that you're missing anything. And also, I will say that I think there was a time in my career where I had defined arts in a very specific way. And what I've learned over time in all of those subway stops is that arts can look different and be different in communities. And it doesn't have to be at the Met or Lincoln Center for it to be valued, right? And I think that's taken me I think I always understood that, but I think I understand it in a different way now. One of the projects we're working on that I am very committed to and very excited about is that we have partnered with NYCHA, which is the largest public housing in the country. There are a minimum of 500,000 residents who live in public housing in New York City. Many of those families don't necessarily think of theater or Times Square or Broadway as for them. What we have committed to is any family with a child between the ages of 5 and 10, and those are loose parameters. If younger or older, it's not going to be a huge issue, can come to our theater totally free of charge to come to 3 performances. If 3 is the sweet spot around creating a habit, we want to help them. And that means we could send teaching artists out to the housing projects. We could provide transportation. In the past, we've provided meal cards if that was the barrier. But really trying to think of what are the barriers that are keeping people from coming to the theater. And, we have families who live 1 subway stop away and have never been to Times Square. They don't think it's safe. They don't think it's for them. They don't, it's for other people. It's an elitist place. And what we're seeing is we had budgeted for 200 tickets this pilot season, and we're now over 1,000 tickets that have been given. And of the 1,000, it's something like 200 are repeat ticket buyers or ordering the tickets. My long-term goal is to ensure that any family living in any NYCHA housing, let's give them a shot, right? Let's say if you go to the theater 3 times and you really don't like it, there's not much I can do. But if you've never been and you don't like it, then I think I can do something there. And so we are committed to ensuring that families who are living in public housing have access to theater at New 42.
Have you gotten a chance to talk to any of the kids or their families about their experiences?
We have. We do a lot of pre and post workshops as well. And what is very funny to me is that 3 visits is an interesting turning point where at the end of the 3rd visit, beginning of the 4th visit, they really form opinions. So like the first, it was like, wow, I've never seen, as we do everything from, circus to drama to narratives to dance. Like we have a very rich and robust season. And like those first 3 times, the kids were all like, wow, I've never seen that before. I've never heard it that way. I've never been, it's a magnificent, 1900 Broadway theater that they're in. And then on the 3rd and the 4th visit, they're like, that 2nd act was a little slow.
Yes.
They begin to create an opinion. Yes. That to me is my favorite, is that when it's not sort of that blind, I love everything, but it was, I didn't get it. I really appreciate that. So that has happened over time, but we really are in its infant. This is the 1st year. So I will have more to report as we continue.
That is awesome. I just want to share a quick story with the both of you. I mentioned I run a community arts outreach program, and we do performances in our brand new professional Madison Youth Arts Center, which is its own standalone building that provides access to youth arts programming for kids all around Madison. And Great. We perform there, and our professional artists perform the stories written by the kids who we serve in our creative arts residency programs, and we bring the kids to the theater and they see their stories performed by professional artists. And this year, we were performing a story written by a kid. It was an epic narrative about a koala family that has this huge adventure that included a sort of series of epic battles in a koala arena where they had to battle these giant koala bots. And when we adapted it, at the end of the koala battle, we had a strobe light and sort of techno-y music, and everybody moved slowly, kind of in the victory, And they're doing this like slow-mo, great set of movements. And out of the back of the theater, I hear, you guys, they got slow-mo in this play. And I was like, our work here is done. We have accomplished what we have set out to do.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate, Russell, the idea that hearing kids' voices about how they see the work that they're getting the opportunity to be part of is like the magic sauce.
Thank you for having us and giving us an opportunity and giving me an opportunity to talk about my mentor. I think mentors are so key to people's individual growth and success, and we don't really get a chance to celebrate them and talk about them. So I'm glad I got to talk about Jody, and I'm glad you invited us. So thank you.
Well, I have to say that it's a big truth. By your students you are taught. Russell has taught me so much. what he's so good at doing is saying, you always say, Jody, and he keeps me on task. Don't forget, you always say.
It is always humbling and inspiring to have conversations with people who you know are smarter than you. I really appreciated having that time with Russell and Jody, and for the two of us to be able to hear the myriad ways that they've made an impact on arts education at that kind of scale.
Yeah, I mean, one day I'm going to try to find someone smarter than me to help me get that same sort of feeling. But until then, this podcast comes close.
Okay, so I have a question for
God.
you.
What have I gotten myself into?
What are 3 ways that you are going to go on a journey to find somebody smarter than you?
Oh, okay. All right. A time machine.
1.
Really, I just need like a bus ride over to Ralph's. This is not going to be difficult.
2.
We have our executive producer, Doug, on the line. I'm not going to go over to his house.
3 things. And for those of us non-Californians, Ralph is not a person.
No.
Ralph is a grocery store?
Let me give you the Piggly Wiggly, the insert Gristedes, Sloan's, the
Julasco.
I
got you.
Okay.
3 things.
3 things. Erica, just get me out of this. Tell us 3 things that people can do to connect with our show.
Well, first, we sure would love it if you would rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts. We know you get asked this all the time, and it is one of the main ways that our podcast makes it into the feeds and gets people to know where we are.
That's one thing. I wasn't paying attention. 1, I started...
You were on your...
No, I wasn't on my phone. I was... This is how smart I am. There was a spot on my desk, and I was trying to wipe it off with my AirPod case. So again, there you go. That's me. 1 thing.
Write to us. Maybe Alec will write you back if he's not erasing a spot with his AirPod case. Write to us if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have suggestions for guests at contact@artseducatorspodcast.com.
That brings us to 2, I want to say.
That's right. And visit us online for all kinds of fun resources about our episodes, about our podcast at www.artseducatorspodcast.com.
3 things.
Onward together through the time machine.
Arts Educators Save the World is hosted by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and produced and co-hosted by me, Alec Lev. Our executive producer is Doug Matica, and our audio producer is Justin Asher. We are also executive produced by the fantastic group at Story Pirate Studios, Lee Overtree, Benjamin Salka, and Amy Fiore. Original music is by Dan Lipton, and our artwork is by Lyra Evans. Check out our website, designed by Cole Locasio, at www.artseducatorspodcast.com. You can follow us on Twitter @ArtsEducators. Yes, somehow that wasn't taken yet. And on Instagram @ArtsEducatorspodcast. Write to us with your questions and comments at contact@artseducatorspodcast.com. And wherever you're listening, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps the show. We are proud to be sponsored in part by the Wallace Foundation, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and the Gibb Faculty Fellowship. Arts Educators Save the World was created by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and Alec Lev.